Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The U.S. Marines fired mortar shells at Fallujah, trying to eliminate Iraqi fighters from the city. The U.S. Marines shelled the area during the night, and by the morning hours they intensified their attacks as part of an operation to disarm the city and rid it of gunmen who survived a week-long attack. The U.S. forces attacked the gunmen's compound, adding that they are controlling most of the city. According to U.S. officials, more than 1,000 people have been killed, and more than 1,000 others were arrested in operations aimed at seizing control of this Sunni city.
A strong
explosion rattled the Jolan neighborhood after U.S. air raids northwest of Fallujah. Meanwhile, 5 U.S. fighter jets shelled the Jabal area south of Fallujah, in addition to bombing the areas of Askari, Shuhada, and the industrial zone east of the city. The sounds of explosions and machine guns are resonating in the city, as it is the only method of communication now. Furthermore, many buildings have been leveled to the ground. U.S. tanks are still on the outskirts of Fallujah, and on its riverbanks they are going back and forth. They are advancing and then reversing quickly, but are unable to enter the city due to heavy fire from armed fighters. According to human rights organizations, the killing of an injured Iraqi man by a U.S. Marine is considered a war crime. The U.S. command is starting an investigation after a videotape revealed that a U.S. Marine shot an unarmed and wounded Iraqi man inside a Fallujah mosque. Fighting continues between the U.S. forces and armed men for the 9th consecutive day, and the humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate. Dozens of bodies are scattered on the streets, and some are still under the rubble of buildings destroyed in the bombings. 4 trucks from the Kuwaiti Red Cross are transporting 120 tons of humanitarian aid to the residents of Fallujah. However, until now, trucks transporting aid from the Iraqi Red Cross have not been allowed into Fallujah for days, and a number of the trucks were forced to unload the aid at a U.S.-operated hospital outside of Fallujah.
While admitting the ferocity of the resistance which they are facing, the United States occupation forces intensified its air and tank bombing operation in the southern part of Fallujah. After the broadcast of an American soldier killing an injured Iraqi, there are now new crimes as they demolished the home while the residents were still inside.
These scenes are not from the archive footage of the Second World War, but they are new images of what happened in the city of Fallujah as a result of American aggressions against the city for the 10th consecutive day. News coming from the disaster area confirm that violent battles are still going on in the southern Fallujah, where a soldier of the occupation forces from the U.S. Marines was killed by a car bomb at one of the American checkpoints. The occupation forces continue to bomb everything in the air and on the ground under the pretext of targeting resistance positions.
These are families, they are farmers, they are innocent. The entire house was demolished.
As images of death and destruction of Fallujah are distributed, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, John Negroponte, dressed in protective gear, said the resistance in Fallujah has not been broken, despite the losses they endured. Negroponte was the one who confirmed his administration's determination to continue hitting the city and expel what he described as armed terrorists. In a rare exhibition since he was appointed as U.S. ambassador in Baghdad, he tried to downplay international outrage outrage over the crime of killing unarmed, injured Iraqis in Fallujah. However, the footage coming out of Fallujah, which was recently broadcast, showed that hysterical killing is pervasive throughout the U.S. occupation forces. Here, they found an Iraqi family which was shouting out Allahu Akbar and Bismillah before the American soldiers exploded their house over them and then entered inside to look for the bodies under the rubble. As the occupation forces continue to explode half of the homes in Fallujah amid horrifying silence on behalf of the international community, the stories of the survivors from the city talk about the suffering they are living under.
Some of the dead bodies on the street are being eaten by dogs. Is this the democracy that Iyad Alawi describes? Is it this destruction that they brought to the city of Fallujah? We are homeless. They destroyed our homes. They are arresting people. They are violating people's dignities. Is this democracy?
We don't want food or water or help. We just want God to make the resistance fighters victorious.
The occupation forces see the total control of Fallujah on the horizon. Some observers viewed that these massacres, which were committed by these forces as a method of terror in order to establish security, has done nothing to calm the situation in Fallujah or the rest of the Iraqi cities, especially before the scheduled elections.
The killing of Margaret Hassan by her kidnappers generated international criticism. British and Dutch officials said that a videotape was released yesterday, revealing that she was executed. Sadness overshadowed the humanitarian organization that was supervised by Margaret, and a special service was held in Dublin to pray for her.
In the London office?
Margaret Hassan spent 30 years in Iraq. She was married to an Iraqi man and was the director of the CARE International Agency. A videotape was released showing an armed man shooting a blindfolded woman in the head. Because the woman looked like Margaret, everyone thought the videotape was authentic.
Well, it's not absolutely totally confirmed.
This was not totally confirmed, but I think that her family has now accepted this unfortunate reality, which has affected all.
Margaret was kidnapped in one of Baghdad's neighborhoods on the 19th of last month on her way to work. The armed groups who did not disclose their identity threatened to kill her if the British forces did not withdraw from Iraq, especially after the deployment of the Black Watch forces in northern Baghdad. When the British government confirmed that it would not negotiate with the kidnappers, people feared that she would face the same fate of the British citizen Kenneth Bigley.
الجنسية إيرلندي المنشأ كينيث بيغلي.
To Margaret Hassan and to join in paying tribute.
We all join in paying tribute and express our great sadness for what happened to Margaret Hassan. This morning I held a meeting with my colleagues and other officials, and I will follow up on this matter.
في دبلن إيرلندا حيث ولدت
In Dublin, Ireland, where Margaret was born, a special service was held and hundreds of people attended. Also in Baghdad, sadness overshadowed hospitals and humanitarian agencies, including CARE International, that was directed by Margaret.
This is a crime. God does not accept such a crime. It is religiously wrong for them to do that. She was a kind woman. She helped Iraq and did humanitarian work. Why did they do that?
This shows the ugliness of the terrorists. This gives us the true image of these kind of people who justify such things in the name of resistance. Where were these people at the time of Saddam Hussein? Why weren't they resisting then?
The answer to this question can remove some of the ambiguity that some people have concerning Iraq and its future.
aid worker Margaret Hassan was believed to have been murdered by her kidnappers after a video emerged showing a blindfolded woman being shot in the head. CARE Australia, the charity organization that employs Hassan, said it appeared she had been killed. The British Embassy also spoke of a video of her killing that was, quote, probably genuine, and Foreign Secretary Jack Straw said in London that Hassan was probably dead. The apparent killing of Hassan drew expressions of horror and sadness across the world. Hassan, an Irish-born British-Iraqi national, was seized in Baghdad on October 19. She headed humanitarian group CARE International's operations in the country. She served for 30 years. Her family issued a statement expressing deep sadness about the way her life was put to an end.
I have been told that there is a video of Margaret which appears to show her murder. The video may be genuine, but I do not know. I beg those people who took Margaret to tell me what they have done with her. They can't tell me. They can call the helpline. I need her. I need her back to rest in peace. Margaret lived with me in Iraq for 30 years. She dedicated her life to serving the Iraqi people. Please now, please return her to me.
New PLO leader Mahmoud Abbas is wrapping up a visit to the Gaza Strip after failing to persuade Hamas to join the political mainstream. In talks with Abbas late on Tuesday, Hamas leader Mahmoud al-Zahar refused to contest January's election to replace Yasser Arafat or halt resistance operations against Israeli occupation targets until Israel changes its policy of aggression. Abbas was concluding a series of face-to-face talks with faction leaders by meeting local heads of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine before heading back to his base in the West Bank town of Ramallah.
Till now, PLO leader Mahmoud Abbas failed to talk Hamas and the Islamic Jihad into joining the political mainstream after they decided to boycott the presidential elections on the grounds that it is illegal. However, both said they would take part in the municipal and parliamentary elections. Abbas separately met with Hamas leaders to try and work out on the role it could play in any unity government.
We are looking to create mechanism how to reach to a final common base agreement between all the Palestinian countries. Second, how to discuss the issue of the participation of the Islamic movement inside PLO. Thirdly, we have to minimize the tension inside the Palestinian society, especially inside Fatah groups, and also how to pave the way for the expected occupation from our land.
According to a lawmaker, both Hamas and the Islamic Jihad want Abbas to establish a unified leadership, an umbrella group that would give the factions a role in decisions, even though they will not compete in the presidential elections. Abbas did not seem to react to the idea.
We are approaching stages of various elections, whether within Fatah or the PLO, and in all our political aspects. The days of the tradition of appointing people are over. Arafat used to do it as head of the Palestinian people, but no one can anymore.
Abbas, the Fatah faction candidate for the presidential elections, is trying to win the support of the other 14 factions, mainly Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. While polls show that Fatah remains the most popular of the Palestinian parties, its support has been eroded in recent years. Some polls have shown that Hamas now enjoys more popularity than Fatah in its Gaza stronghold. It would be very important for Abbas to subdue Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, one of Israel's conditions to realize the new leadership.
So our policy that I intend to carry on with is to carry out the disengagement, and if after a period of time we see that it's possible to hold talks or that there is a Palestinian leadership prepared to fight terror, then it will be possible to coordinate, at first on security issues, then if Palestinians take steps, maybe coordination on transferring their territory that will be evacuated by us.
The PLO leader tried to work out a deal on a ceasefire with Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, but they played it down in the current situation. They said a change of tactics could only be considered if Israel stops all aggressions, assassinations, occupations, and release prisoners.
An Israeli army study warned that a wide-scale conflict with Hezbollah would leave hundreds of Israelis dead. This comes as an unknown group claimed responsibility for launching on Monday 2 Katyusha rockets that hit northern occupied Palestine.
Chaos dominated the Israeli political and military platform after 2 Katyusha rockets, allegedly fired from southern Lebanon, landed in northern occupied Palestine. While top Israeli officials rushed to distribute threats and allegations over the issue, a senior military source said that the Israeli government decided to deal with the incident with temperance, without ignoring its right to respond in what he called the appropriate time.
We must deal with the issue, and if they did not stop that, they will pay the price.
Israeli security sources said that Israel would respond as soon as it reaches a conclusion concerning what happened, while the Israeli television ruled out the possibility of an Israeli military response. Earlier in Beirut, an organization calling itself the Ghalib Awali Martyrs Group claimed responsibility, but Israeli security sources disqualified any connections with Hezbollah.
Hezbollah distinguishedly denied any relation with the incident. According to the way the rockets were used and launched and the target they hit, I probably dropped the possibility that Hezbollah took part in the execution, because Hezbollah is far better than that.
The Israeli TV meanwhile aired a secret report written by the occupation army showing that any confrontation with Hezbollah will lead to the death of hundreds of Israelis in case the Islamic resistance use its missile arsenal.
Hezbollah are testing the level of Israeli response. They are always challenging us and trying to gain and mark points on our military that must stop these attempts. But how and when? Because according to Israeli intelligence, there are more than 10,000 rockets on the other side, and this imposes a strategic balance. And in case they are used, hundreds of Israeli civilians will be killed.
Security analysts denied too any relation between the launching of the rockets and the Mirsad-1 drone that, according to them, emerged into the equation as a response to the daily Israeli violations.
Israel has issued a stern warning to the Lebanese government to prevent military action from its territory, regardless of the identity of the persecutors, or suffer the consequences of severe retaliation. The warning followed the discovery of the remains of a Katyusha rocket near the settlement of Shlomi. Israeli officers have indicated there will be no imminent attack on Lebanon. Western Galilee Brigade head Han Levni said an escalation will not serve Israeli interests. Military officials have indicated there will be no imminent attack on Lebanon, but if there are casualties in similar strikes, the response will be aggressive. More with Mohalil Fakir.
Israel vowed to respond against militants who launched a cross-border rocket attack into the Jewish state from southern Lebanon, but said it would act with restraint to avoid inflaming the situation. A little-known group that Israeli military sources say is apparently made up of Palestinians with ties to Lebanese Hezbollah fighters claimed Monday's attack, in which one Katyusha rocket hit an Israeli town and another landed at sea. Israeli officials said the attack may have been an attempt to cause a, quote, provocation on Israel's northern border after the death of Palestinian President Yasser Arafat, the symbol of his people's fight for statehood. Israeli Foreign Minister Silvan Shalom said Israel must examine ways to respond and cannot treat such barrages as though nothing had happened. He said military action was under consideration, but Israeli Deputy Defense Minister Ziv Boim warned against an excessive reaction. Israel has often retaliated with airstrikes against Hezbollah, which led the armed campaign that ousted Israel from the south following 22 years of occupation, and for attacks on Israeli positions in the occupied Sheba farms since 2000. Following Monday's attack, which caused no damage or casualties, Israel lodged a formal protest with the United Nations and demanded the Lebanese government take control of its border. A group calling itself the Martyr Ghalib Awali Group said it carried out the attack and a similar one last month and vowed to keep up its rocket fire on Israel. The group is named for a Hezbollah official killed in a Beirut bombing in July that Hezbollah blamed on Israel. Lebanese security sources insisted the group was not itself linked to Hezbollah. A Hezbollah spokesman declined comment, but the group had made clear it bears no responsibility for statements not signed by Hezbollah.
The Israeli newspaper Haaretz cited Israeli security sources suggesting Palestinians from refugee camps in Lebanon backed by Hezbollah could have been behind the attack. But the Fatah chief in Lebanon, Sultan Abu al-Ainain, denied that Arafat's mainstream movement was involved and warned the accusations could be a pretext for a quote aggression against the camps. Lebanese Foreign Minister Mahmoud Abbas said his government would launch an investigation to track down the group responsible, saying it wanted to ensure the stability of the volatile region. An Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman said Hezbollah has an independent military presence in southern Lebanon that is supported by Syria and Iran, with the Lebanese government's consent. Lebanon has filed protests with the United Nations for flights by Israeli warplanes violating the country's airspace. The UN office in Beirut appealed to all sides for calm and urged Beirut to double its efforts to secure an immediate end to these grave violations. Earlier this month, the United Nations said it was concerned about the possibility of rising tensions a day after Hezbollah dispatched what it called its first surveillance drone into Israeli airspace. Israel's military said the craft was an Iranian unmanned vehicle operated by Hezbollah. The group promised more flights would follow.
On day 9 of the U.S. assault on Fallujah, American mortars pounded parts of the battered city as troops hunted for gunmen still fighting the U.S. forces and their Iraqi allies. A Lebanese satellite channel broadcast television footage showing armed men firing during gun battles in the empty streets of Fallujah. The footage also showed a series of large explosions as dark clouds of smoke loomed above the city. U.S. officers said Marines were cleaning up fragments of an insurgent force that left hundreds of people dead in the rubble of the urban battlefield. U.S. officials say more than 1,000 gunmen have been killed and at least 1,000 suspected fighters have been detained. But Washington has acknowledged that senior militants, including Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, probably escaped before the attack on Fallujah. The bloodshed in Fallujah, including the shooting dead of an unarmed and wounded gunman in a mosque by a U.S. Marine, has provoked anger and dismay among many in Iraq and the Arab world. 15 Iraqis were killed and 22 were wounded when a suicide bomber rammed his car into a U.S. armored vehicle in the northern city of Baji. Several U.S. soldiers were among the injured. A market area in the center of Baji was also blown apart by the blast. It's the latest in a series of attacks which have taken place across Iraq in recent days. Later, clashes broke out between U.S. troops and insurgents in the town, prompting the American forces to seal off a nearby oil refinery. Other towns have also seen an increase in unrest. A police station in Mosul was targeted, as were ones in Baqtuba and Kirkuk. And 2 Turkish truck drivers were killed and their vehicles destroyed in a rocket attack on a civilian convoy near Samarra. Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas has urged activist groups to help with an orderly succession to Yasser Arafat as Israel spoke of possible coordination with Palestinians on its Gaza pullout plan. Abbas, a former prime minister who was elected chief of the Palestinian Liberation Organization soon after Palestinian President Yasser Arafat's death last week, met in Gaza with leaders of Palestinian Hamas and jihad groups. Meanwhile, Palestinian officials have said they plan to send a delegation to Paris to seek details on what caused the death of Arafat last week at a French hospital. Palestinian Premier Ahmed Qreya's office said in a statement that the conditions surrounding the death of Arafat raises questions. Qreya has also appointed a panel to look into the causes of the Palestinian leader's death. However, the French government today insisted that Yasser Arafat was not poisoned, and Le Monde newspaper quoted doctors as saying he suffered from an unusual blood disease and a liver problem. The government also stood by its refusal to provide any details about Arafat's death. French government spokesperson Jean-François Cop reiterated France's refusal to release Arafat's medical file to anyone except the late leader's family. She said the public authorities can in no case violate this law, which touches on fundamental freedoms. One Saudi policeman was killed in a clash with extremists linked to Al-Qaeda, who have been waging a campaign of violence in the kingdom. A Saudi Interior Ministry official said clashes took place late yesterday in Qasim in northern Saudi Arabia. He said gunmen opened fire at security forces searching a house, killing one policeman and wounding 8 others. He added that after a car chase, forces arrested 5 men, 2 of whom are wanted militants. The official said police seized guns, ammunition, explosives and documents from the house. Russia is working on new nuclear missile systems that other powers do not have in order to protect itself against future security challenges. Speaking to armed forces chiefs, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the country had to keep its nuclear defenses in sound condition. He said research and successful testing of new nuclear missile systems technology was being conducted. Putin, however, did not give further details about what type of weapons he was referring to or what shape these new security threats could take. Indian troops killed 2 rebels in the center of Kashmir's biggest city of Srinagar, saying the gunmen had planned to attack a meeting addressed just hours later by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Indian soldiers fought with 2 heavily armed rebels who had been holed up since late yesterday in a rundown building overlooking the stadium where Singh was due to make a speech. The militants later climbed a nearby hill from where they fired intermittently. Soldiers surrounded the hill and shot the 2 men dead. Singh, on his first visit to the region since taking office in May, vowed to hold talks with all Kashmiri groups and held out hope of further scaling back the number of troops deployed there if tensions eased. Swarms of red locusts, some at 7.6 centimeters long, have swept through Cairo, flying high above tall towers or swooped down onto tree-lined streets. The flying insects arrived from neighboring Libya after devouring the countryside in Central and Western Africa in past months. A locust expert with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, said under the current climatic conditions, the locusts will not likely cause damage. He added that they will most likely either die or migrate further to the south.
Tehran says it has a firm resolve to develop a peaceful nuclear program at any cost. President Khatami told reporters after a daily cabinet session on Wednesday that his government will never back down when it comes to the question of national interest. The chief executive also added failure by Europe to keep its end of the bargain is translated to Tehran's non-commitment to its promises. Iran spells positive the very recent agreement it reached with the EU Big Three. Parliament Speaker Ghulam Ali Haddad Adel said in a closed session of the chamber also attended by the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, Hassan Rouhani, Wednesday, the assurance offered by Europe should be fulfilled in black and white. Meanwhile, Iranian deputies on Wednesday released a resolution saying Tehran-IAEA cooperation left with a taste of defeat the enemies of the Islamic establishment who geared up for forming a global coalition against Iran.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.